We all need to be stakeholders in thinking of strategic ways to support the incidence of dementia in our community.
At Home with Growing Older is a nonprofit organization which believes in peer learning and creating discussions which bring the lens of aging to a variety of topics. At Home with Growing Older is proud to be your host of At Home on Air, a radio hour offering connection, community, and knowledge to our participants remotely. Now, we invite you to listen and learn from this live recorded episode of At Home on Air.
Welcome to At Home on Air. I'm Susie Stadler, an architect by profession, the executive director of At Home with Growing Older, and the producer of this podcast. In our episodes, we delve into the meaning of being at home with growing older, really from two angles. One is how we can adapt our living spaces to better support us as we age. And then the other angle is how can we cultivate a sense of belonging within our communities and, as importantly, with ourselves. So thank you for joining us as we explore these themes with inspiring guests from the arts, medicine, social services, and beyond. Our guest for this episode is interdisciplinary artist Rowena Richie. Welcome, Rowena.
Thank you so much.
Rowena uses her creative skills to connect older, isolated adults, and also those living with dementia, with their caregivers and with the larger community. Before we jump into this thought-provoking conversation, a reminder, please think about sending this podcast to others who might be interested in listening and benefit from it. I want to start the conversation with one of Rowena's insights. Everybody gets dementia one way or another. If not us, someone we know, someone we love. Since everyone gets dementia, can we all get dementia, understand it, get in touch with its grief and its gifts? Can we remember people living with dementia and their care partners? Can we create a dementia-ready world? Can we get it, not just in our heads, but in our hearts? A big statement. So what does this really mean, Rowena, and how did you arrive at this?
Susie, thank you for honoring me with reading that. It is a provocative statement. I want to clarify that I don't mean we all incur the brain disorder of dementia. I mean that it affects us all, whether it directly affects us or impacts someone in our life, in our community, at work, in our faith community, in our neighborhood. It's a prevalent disease. And it's increasing in large part because people are living longer. And this is especially true, I'm learning, in developing countries, where the incidence of people living longer is multiplying by the 200th percentile. So it's urgent that we start breaking what someone I really respect, whose name is Mary Fridley, calls the cone of silence around dementia. And I think I arrived at that somewhat provocative statement to make it clear that it's all of our problem and it's all of our gift to be part of the solution, to be part of a care team. My way into that was really as a carer for a carer. My friends are impacted by being dementia care partners for their families. And I learned about the intensity of that through their experience of caring for someone living with dementia. So I come to this work really through that lens of being a carer for the carer. It led me to having a lot more direct experience working with people living with dementia And that experience came with some really incredible moments of connection, profoundly joyful moments of connection, often with not very many witnesses or people to share that experience with, because something that happens in the world of dementia is people have a great aversion. There's a lot of fear in the dementia narrative. There's what has been referred to as a tragedy narrative around dementia, that with the loss of your memory, you can lose yourself. Memory loss, which is associated with Alzheimer's and other brain disorders under the umbrella of dementia. But with Alzheimer's, the most common, people can kind of justify ghosting or disappearing on their loved ones with the idea that they won't remember anyways. Knowing that has led me to realize that there aren't as many caregivers as we need. And so those caregivers are overwhelmed and exhausted, and they need care as well. So this is my sort of framework for that opening statement. We all need to be stakeholders in thinking of strategic ways to support the incidence of dementia in our community.
Thank you, Rowena. Your role as an artist and your study of what you call creative inquiry, how does this affect or inspire your work with older adults living with dementia or in social isolation?
My curiosity often leads me to want to understand, and my primary tool for understanding is my creativity. So if there's something I'm really curious about, I apply my creativity to it, which enables me to come at it from a number of angles. I turn it into an art project or a writing project. I think having dementia, again, in my experience, can lead someone to lose some of their abilities to communicate verbally. And so, what is the visceral experience of having dementia? I'm a dancer, a lifelong dancer. I have used my dance skills to engage people in physical practices to help support their wellness. And that includes people living with dementia. So creative inquiry to me is sort of validating that knowledge is grown through my creative research. And then that knowledge is expressed in the art project or the dance or any number of creative outlets that come through on the other side of that inquiry. So I was extremely curious about dementia and in particular dementia care when I saw my friends struggling so intensely. Many of my friends are artists and care partners, dementia care partners. And so there is, I would say, like a natural affinity for artists to experiment and improvise, to not be afraid of imagining something that's not there yet, to innovate a way through, to use creativity to come at something from a different angle. And that's been my practice, to use my particular skill set, dance. I have some theater background. If some of you are familiar with the yes and principle, which is very applicable to dementia care because we're trying not to correct or negate. No, that's not Uncle John. Yes, that's Uncle John. And that is a beautiful portrait of Aunt Christine. You know, how do we validate but move towards connection instead of breaking down that connection?
I'm also curious about how this one-on-one or very direct experience you have when working with people with dementia, how this has translated into your work with scientists at UCSF when you did your fellowship there. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and what your ideal world would look like?
Yeah. Oh, I love that question. My ideal world would look like a lot of collaboration. I am a Global Atlantic Fellow for Equity in Brain Health at the Global Brain Health Institute, which is under the Memory and Aging Center at UCSF and Trinity College, Dublin. It's a cross-professional fellowship for 1 year, a full-time immersion at UCSF or Trinity with other people who are committed to reducing the impact and scale of dementia. So again, as I was saying, we're in urgent need right now. We're bringing together not only neuroscientists and neurologists, but policymakers, an architect, gerontologists, journalists, to use their skills to look at the challenge of dementia, which largely impacts people who are aging. The prevalence of it is greater, so that's why aging is bundled in there. My ideal world is more collaborations between the scientists and the artists. My experience was sort of learning in a crash course way how to do scientific research. And that wasn't that pleasant. I'll just say it was a little bit like maybe if I asked neuroscientists to choreograph an evening length production without any training in choreography or theater design. What would the sort of task be? So it was interesting. And again, my curiosity sort of got the best of me, and I was really willing to learn, maybe a little too willing to be changed. And part of that is the hierarchy of the sciences over the arts, right? We have this kind of idea that science is rigorous and proof is more substantive than anecdotal proof. And so, Susie, I talk a lot about lived experience as proof. And my experience of creating with people living with dementia and seeing that it's adding to their quality of life is my sense of proof that it's working. What would be ideal is if some social scientists and researchers who were interested in that more quantitative proof and wanted to publish on it in JAMA collaborated with me, and they did the science and said, look what you're doing. Because I am, like you too, curious about that. And I feel like we really need the influence. And it's happening. Those collaborations are happening. And there are more and more opportunities for artists and scientists to collaborate. And that leads to funding, And so the funding to keep the collaborations going would be part of my ideal world. But what I really learned is that because evidence-based science requires repetition and these standardized instruments, art doesn't exactly fit that mold. I want to tell you two quick stories. My very first neuro exam that I observed, so again, I'm coming in with a dance background. I have a master's degree. I've done some research in my life, but this was different. This was in a neuro exam in a clinical setting in a medical school. The research participant came in and he had a very jerky gait and was really feeling a lot of the tests. But he said he was writing an album of songs with a roommate, and he was a composer. He had a lot of love in life. These were the pieces that I remembered. There was no place to track that on the neuro exam. There was no place to collect that data and say, hey, a person who has a creative background, who's a songwriter or a composer and has companions to help him keep that music alive, might have a healthy prognosis. Yes, he has a terminal illness, but is he doing okay? He has a lot of love in his life. These were the things that stuck with me and inspired me and moved me to want to have some other kind of opportunity for him to participate in that was like celebratory, celebrating his contributions of his music. But there was no place for that.
Maybe this is also a good opportunity to talk about specific projects or connections you have created through art with somebody like this or other people living with dementia.
Yes. Well, at the end of that fellowship, I was given a grant to do a pilot. There's a report about it on this website, fivebravespirits.info. And it was to apply my creative engagement. And what I mean by creative engagement is a deep listening, showing up and deeply listening to the person living with dementia and learning about them, like what interests them. It was for dyad. So the care partner was a really important part of this, to give some anecdotes of what they loved to do together. My goal was, can I use my creative engagement practice to elevate their quality of life, both for the person living with dementia, but also the quality of the relationship between the couple. And I have to say, they were kind of ringers, I guess, because it was right at the top of the pandemic. I think they were so enthusiastic to try anything, because not only were they in the bubble of dementia, but they were now in the bubble of isolation. So any kind of community that they had shut down. This one-on-one project that was inspired by my theater collective, which is called For You. And the whole premise of For You is that we make these customized or tailored experiences based on what you like. So I got to learn that this couple, and especially the person living with dementia, had this incredible internal life, this incredible creativity. And we would Zoom on a weekly basis. And I would take my cues from Jane. What did I notice on her? She's wearing plaid pajamas. So we would do a plaid pajama dance. And that sort of got kicked off with maybe some like extra leg shakes. I know this is a podcast, so you can't see me kicking my legs up, but like extra kinds of pants dance. And maybe we would use the sound of pants dance, take a chance, lead you to thinking about other kinds of ants crawling. It would just kind of be this follow along improvisation. And improvisation was critical because with dementia, there's no certainty of where we're headed. And that is especially like my jam. I love not knowing where we're headed and kind of trying to just stay one step ahead with an idea to follow along. So we did this every week until we could finally meet after a year. And by the time we met in person, the dementia had increased and my friends had declined some. When we met up at that point, it was a lot of sitting in companionable silence, but there was still an exchange happening because we had had that intimacy and we had that connection. And me sitting in companionable silence, like, I do a lot of chi work. And one of the things I feel with chi is the energy between my palms when I hold them, almost touching, but not quite. And there was that kind of visceral connection between us because of the trust that we had built. But it took that time, it took a risk. And again, I think artists are somewhat naturally inclined to experimentation, risk taking. Touch was a big part of it when we could finally touch again, but we didn't have to fill the space with a lot of activity at that stage. And that became part of the intervention, was sitting together, looking at the birds, listening to the sounds. Trash truck would drive by, we would think about that too.
So it takes time.
And time, not on a linear sense, but the sort of slowing. Time as a dimension. One of the key phrases we came up with was sloth is growth too. And this idea of the expansiveness of our relationship in fitting into time and time fitting into our relationship.
As you said in the beginning, many caregivers are just so thinly spread and close to burnout. There's always so much to do. So to think about art and creative engagement seems just one more thing. I'm curious, how would you respond to this? And what are like little things everybody can do, even if they're thinly stretched?
Yeah, we're all thinly stretched, right? I mean, many of us are. And so a little thing you can do if you're supporting someone living with dementia or supporting a caregiver is to check in once a week, a text message. My friend Temple, she was her mom's primary caregiver. She and I had a nightly text exchange and we were on different time zones. So it wasn't back and forth, but just a little note to say, I see you, I hear you. Here's what's happening. We did that for a year with a Rumi poem every day. Doesn't have to be every day though. A line of poetry is such a balm. Sending a postcard. I know mail has gotten so junky. I did a mail project of sending a card to Jane, who was the person living with dementia, And mail was a big deal. That was like an event at their house. The slot opening, the sound of it cascading through the mail slot, and then seeing something there. Her partner, Joyce, would report she would carry the letters around with her. I tried to make them extra textural, a sensory thing. I dare say we can send a prayer or a meditation or a thought. Whether you believe in that energetic transference of that or not, it might inspire you to then make a text or a phone call. Like, I'm thinking about this person and now I'm going to pick up the phone. We don't have to be artistic or creative. Bring over a brown bag lunch, drop something off, ask if you can do an errand for somebody. Can I pick something up for you? Recognizing that we can't all be primary care partners. We don't all have the bandwidth, but we don't all have the capacity either, which is a unique skill set to be in the presence of people whose cognitive change is unsettling to many of us. So I appreciate that. And what can you do? There's something you can do. Being part of a community. There are many communities that offer dementia programming, such as the Meet Me at MoMA model, which is a special day at museums and galleries where they have programming for people living with dementia and their care partners. Could you attend that and get to know people and then maybe just be part of their social network? I'm very in favor of micro communities of support because, like you said, we're stretched thin, but can we shore up one other person or two other people?
Yes, great example. This kind of caregiver support. Apart from your work with people living with dementia, you also engage with people who are affected by the other big crisis in our society, which is social isolation. You did this project together with Little Brother,
Friends of the Elderly, LBFE, yes.
Who match volunteers with elders. You and your colleagues started this project, Artists and Elders. Can you tell a little bit about the project and maybe also about the challenges the project had, because it was a limited time period of engagement?
Yeah, I'll just say, social isolation is a risk factor for dementia. So this is something we should be concerned about at all phases of life, right? And we're learning that a lot of young people are socially isolated or they're struggling with loneliness and isolation. So yes, as a risk factor for dementia, this is one of the reasons I think we have this opportunity to think really creatively about how to support older people in our community. Our project was really looking at older people, and it started at the top of the pandemic when we were all experiencing isolation. I mean, one of the interesting things about it is it sort of leveled the playing field for a minute with us all having this sense of being cut off from one another. So this is my theater collective called For You. We saw in our own families, our loved ones kind of tanking, especially in my colleague's family, where her mother is the sort of third parent to their young son. That grandmother did not have contact with her grandson, which was like a lifeline to her feeling, meaningful and having a purpose-driven life. How can we help her? We started this project called Artists and Elders. Because it was the pandemic, a lot of us, especially as dancers, performance makers, did not have work. The theaters were closed, the performances were canceled. This relates back to your creative mutual aid question. How can I use my creative resources to support what we're experiencing right now? We put a call out to artists. Would you be interested in like a matchmaking service to partner you with an older person for a discrete period of time to have some creative engagement? We got an overwhelming response from both artists and older people. Yes, I would love to be matched with someone. We very quickly saw that it was not so much for the older person as with. A lot of the older people were really interested in using their creativity at this time that we were, nervously waiting to see what the next news would bring. We asked them to create a gift. That's another one of the sort of tenets of For You, is to think of performance making as gift giving. And again, if you're making something specifically for one person, it's sort of along the lines of giving a gift. Like, you need to know something about that person in order to give them a great gift, right? So you need to learn stuff about one another in order to have a gift type creative exchange. The gifts are documented on the For You website. That's foryou.productions. On the artists and elders page, there's an incredible range of projects that people did together, from like a chapbook of poetry, a time machine. An artist made a time machine for an elder who was really missing traveling. Songs were collaborated on. Somebody made a map for an elder who was like a community ambassador. The elder could then use this map as a conversation piece to start other conversations. That connects to your question of the challenge. We wanted to respect everybody's time and asked people for a 4-week commitment to this friendship, which at the time we didn't know the pandemic was going to be this years-long event. It was challenging to extract ourselves from those relationships and to say, this is the end, here's the gift, it's been beautiful. And so that's why this conversation piece is so important, Susie, because then it leads to other connections and conversations. And this sort of what I think of as a daisy chain effect of, I have given you a gift that hopefully will lead to other connections. And then you'll have the gift of that connection. And that person will now be like, you're never going to believe I met this cool guy. He had this map. Oh, tell me about that. We also wanted it to serve as a sort of repository of examples so that you too could try this at home, connect with somebody in your life. They don't necessarily have to be isolated or an elder. When we ran out of people that we knew, we started partnering with Little Brothers Friends of the Elderly, which provides companionship for clinically isolated older people, many of whom are low income in San Francisco. We've matched artists with members of this community to have these exchanges. And those have, again, blossomed in many cases into these ongoing friendships. When we finally could come back in person, we had events to let people have in-person connections.
It would be great to just do this in family relationships at times. This project, this gift giving for each other in little ways. The title of the conversation is, how can we break down aging and dementia stereotypes in everyday life through creative engagement? I would like to think about, how can the built environment, the city, support this creative engagement, enabling people living with dementia to participate in daily public life?
I was at the Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, and I was walking through it, and over the loudspeaker, I hear, Sky Harbor is a dementia-friendly airport. If you need services, come to this kiosk. And I read up on it, and it's basically a cacti lanyard that identifies you as somebody who requires extra assistance for dementia. They do dementia training for their staff. They have a protocol in place. And it just occurs to me that it might be difficult to get people to put this cacti lanyard on, because it's like a cart before the horse question. Given the stigma associated with dementia, will people be courageous enough to identify themselves as having dementia? Now, I wouldn't know as a regular person, this cacti lanyard, it's discreet. I'm not going to know that unless I did my research. It's not like I have dementia. These kinds of very public initiatives where we're normalizing, some of us here have dementia, and we want to support you. If we did that, we would probably be supportive of people with all kinds of differences. My friend was like, if we had a sign in a shop window that said dementia-friendly shop or dementia-friendly restaurant, that suggests that those retailers or servers have been coached, trained, educated about how it is to work with someone with cognitive difference. That's going to mean better, more inclusive service for all of us across all kinds of difference, all kinds of barriers. It reminds me, Susie, of what you do with universal design, where if we think about making our crosswalks, our buses better for people living with dementia, they're going to be better for all of us. They're going to be safer for all of us. They're going to be more welcoming for everyone. I don't have dementia yet, but my eyesight is going. And I don't always feel safe crossing the street. Now we have Waymos, we have all kinds of San Francisco traffic and distraction. And I'm a dancer. I think I have a lot of grace and could jump out of the way of a car. But you know what I'm saying? I want my crosswalk to be safer for me. So taking this approach, thinking about bringing this sort of lens. And I love the idea of focusing on dementia, because again, if we're forecasting that we're going to help look at dementia and that's going to have this ripple effect to help everyone with any other kind of disability or difference being intimidated by the traffic, then that's a good thing. And again, it's not just traffic, but transportation is really a barrier. I have these fantasies of sensory inclusive buses that will go around and pick people up from their residence or their memory care facility and bring them into some of the community centers where they offer some of the programming, like I was talking about earlier, Meet Me at MoMA program or a dementia chorus. There are performances by people living with dementia. There is artwork by people. I love that SF MoMA has the acquisition and exhibit of people with intellectual disabilities. Let's bring people living with dementia to see these exhibits, to feel representation. But we have to work towards bringing people there safely and inclusively.
Yes, it's an absolute great vision, and we all know that there are many obstacles along the way, but I think it's really important to hold on to this and work towards it.
You are listening to At Home on Air. We are now switching to questions by participating audience members in this recorded live episode. If you want a chance to ask your question, visit us at athomewithgrowingolder.org and register for the next live episode.
I would love to read some of the examples, comments, and questions. Val says, I recently learned of the free dance class for people with Parkinson's from SF Ballet and thought that was great.
Fantastic. Yes, Dance for Parkinson's disease. This is another great example of the arts and sciences, right? We've used the sciences, but there's also joy. Learning that choreography can help you with the symptoms of Parkinson's, but also being in community with one another, the joy of creative movement together, of being supported by other people who can relate to what you're going through is absolutely fantastic. And I'm glad that's getting so much support.
Yes. And Val also brings another example, an SF support group from Open House on Zoom, where people help each other with supporting loved ones living with dementia. Also, Zoom is definitely an option to connect, like what you said before. This offering can be a postcard, reaching out and supporting each other. So important.
Yes, it is. It is. It's so important. That's beautiful, Val. I'm super happy to hear that. When there was an uptick of incidents of violence against AAPI elders, we partnered with some AAPI elders through Open House to make these protest type posters to celebrate the contributions. They said things like, be yourself and still blooming. And we put those in shop windows to support. And again, like these kind of more public facing performance and art making creative practices get people curious.
And again, sometimes it's just little things. For instance, Terry says, when my mother, Eleanor, was living in a boarding care deep in Alzheimer's, we hired Odile Lavaux. She's a musician, dementia specialist. We asked her to identify many small ways to uplift and engage mom in her environment. And something as simple as moving her bed closer to the window and keeping the blinds up so that she could watch the trees and birds. These kind of gestures. Actually, Odile spoke years ago at one of our forums, Odile is a wonderful musician and caregiver.
This is so beautiful. Thank you. I'm here on the East Coast for a memorial of my friend's mother who died of Alzheimer's, and there was nothing as glorious as watching the sunrise or sunset for her. And again, this window, she never tired of the view, and that is beautiful to be attuned to that, to be attuned to the experience that your loved one's having, listening to the birds or watching the sun or the moonrise.
Yeah, views in our workshops. This is always one of the most mentioned aspects or qualities of what people love about their home. It's the view out the window. And it's not always the view of the Grand Canyon, but like the view of a tree, for instance, or the sky. Some other examples, Mariah says, we created a box of memorable items, photos, cassettes, special coins, etc., and placed it in an easily accessible spot where they can open it anytime. Being able to open this box to rediscover these treasures prompts conversations and opportunities to engage in a different way.
Yes, beautiful. I love any failure-free art. I mean, this expression, failure-free art, like dripping watercolor from a paintbrush on a piece of paper, abstract kind of work. And what's so beautiful about that is you could do that with any skill range of people. There are ways that we can express ourselves that don't require expertise.
Right. That's so important to remember. Rachel shares, we met a man at a conference who cared about a memory kit. He shared it proudly. It was something he made and cared about to help navigate and get through his day-to-day activities.
Again, that's really stunning. And it reminds me of what I've seen in some residential care memory settings where the family will write a list of things that their loved one loves or is curious about so that any new caregiver, because we know this is a challenge, there's so much turnover, can show up and have this little portrait or also have these materials. Like, how beautiful to have a memory box in the room and to be able to say, oh, this is beautiful. This looks like you were having so much fun. Or tell me about this picture. And again, it doesn't need to be correct. Tell me anything about this picture. It's a conversation prompt. It's a creative prompt. And then we can run with that.
Yes, absolutely. Pat mentioned the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco, which used to have a monthly dance activity with live music for people with mobility issues, including Parkinson's. I mean, music is such an amazing stimulant.
Yes, I believe it is maybe one of the longest preserved senses for people living with dementia. And there's even some science around the reminiscence bump of when between the ages of 12 and 25 in any particular person's lifetime, that music gets stored the deepest. There's an incredible video out there. Well, there's a couple. There's the gentleman who kind of wakes up when he listens to music. And then there's like a prima ballerina with what looks like late stage Alzheimer's suddenly bursting into her Swan Lake choreography. Like, it's there. It's right there. And it's because they put the headphones on her. So yes, music is very beautiful. And I know from music therapists, like in the very late stages, the dying stages, it's not too late to think of music as part of the healing towards end of life.
I think there was a documentary, A Life with Music. Is music now being used in care homes? I mean, it seems easy.
Yes, yes. This kind of music, having a performer come and play the piano, and people love to sing and dance. And then music therapist bedside. My father-in-law just passed away last week. He had a music therapist come, and my husband was there and said, do you know these hymns? Do you know this piece? And she played them for them. And how stunning. He had a stroke and was asleep, but how healing also for my husband as part of this journey to have this beautiful trio, the three of them, the musician, my husband, and his father, listening to this music, so meaningful to them. So yes, music, 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 music.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear.
Thank you.
This coming together through music. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Rachel also says, I think we have to counteract this notion that people stop learning and growing and being playful when they have dementia or other disabilities or differences. I believe we need to see examples of this in our public spaces and in the media in order to normalize it.
Yes, please. Exactly. There's not enough, and there's not a lot of bridging. And I understand there are sensitivity issues around people living with dementia. It can be overwhelming to be in great public places, but I love the idea of more integration. Shout out to Ann Bastings, who's done so much incredible work. And I think of the work that she does that brings staff, families, extended families, gathering people to normalize for them too. My friend says dementia shines a light on the complexities of families. And in some cases, families can't hold together around dementia. And so this idea of creating opportunities for families to come together to shore each other up, to normalize it. And yes, I can't agree more, Rachel. It's so spot on. Like, we need to really normalize. I think having people with dementia, maybe in earlier stages dementia, be part of the think tank, or what I like to think of as a heart tank, a micro community of people thinking around how we could truly create a culture for thriving. Even living with dementia, you can still be thriving. You can be especially creative. Sometimes the inhibitions that we have are barriers to our creativity, and dementia can alleviate some of that inhibition and allow us to be more creative, more playful, disinhibited in ways that spark creativity and fuel us to play.
Yes, absolutely. I think it would be wonderful for everybody. I'm sure your head is full of new projects and ideas. The last project was parties. So what's next?
The project that we're working on right now, we did it in San Francisco and we want to travel it to other places, is called Party On, Party People. It's parties for specific older people. Again, we partnered with LBFE on selecting some older people that had never had a party for them. One person was born like the day after Christmas. He said, I've never had a party thrown for me in my life. Someone else had never been invited to a bar. So we wanted to have a bar party for this older gentleman. And again, the idea is sort of that everyone's a stakeholder. So we invited the public to these parties, but not to be entertained or passive spectator or party recipients. We said, you're co-hosts. You are here to celebrate this older person with us. Thinking of public spaces that can normalize healthy, creative aging and dementia. In one case, we had a party at a restaurant. This was a restaurant in Chinatown that had a karaoke room. We had the party guests arrive a little bit early. We taught them some choreography and a number so that when we brought the guest of honor through, they greeted him with this almost flash mobby kind of celebration. And then we continued to sort of leverage our guests as co-hosts to help celebrate this elder in our lives and be part of his village. And again, we want that ripple effect to be, you won't necessarily have the capacity to be his friend forever, but how can you take this experience and throw a party for someone in your life and really think about the people coming along in your immediate community, but maybe outside of your community too? There's often a little awkwardness around, like, but I don't know this person that I'm throwing a party for. And by the end of the party, you do. It creates this kind of immediate intimacy. So that was really beautiful.
It's sort of this invitation to step outside our comfort zones.
Yes, yes,
Which,
show up.
because of the pandemic, has become even more difficult because we all have retreated into the comfort of our homes. Stepping out of the comfort zone like this is a great invitation. Rowena, so inspiring and so important. Artists already have this incredible, important role in our community, in society. And I think this will become more important as more and more people are going to live with dementia.
Today is my 86th birthday.
Yay, Sheila.
Happy birthday. And what
Thank
a
you.
thrill to have you spending some of your birthday on this. Thank you. I celebrate you. I see you. I hear you. I love you.
Thank you, Sheila. What a great finale to this conversation.
Bon anniversaire.
Thank you.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Rowena, for inspiring all of us. This was beautiful. Moving forward, I also would like to invite people to the next podcast and live conversation on October 10. It's somewhat related. We're going to talk with author Gabrielle Bendina Viani. She's an urbanist and photographer. She just put out a book. It's called The Cities We Need. And it's about these everyday spaces which connect people.
Congratulations to you,
Connect.
Susie,
So-
on this new season. And I'm so grateful. I love this topic. Thank you to all of you as my co-hosts for adding your reflections and suggestions and anecdotes. It's really beautiful to be a part of the community with you. So thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you, Rowena. And have a wonderful time celebrating the life of your friend's mother.
Thank you very much. Thanks, you guys.
Bye, everybody.
This episode of At Home on Air was produced by the At Home with Growing Older team. We could not host these conversations without the generosity of our marvelous and passionate guests and hosts. Thank you for sharing your personal and professional insights. Thank you to our live audience for your thoughtful contributions. To subscribe to this podcast and for more information, visit us at athomewithgrowingolder.org. Thank you to our sponsor, the Walnut Foundation, a San Francisco family foundation. At Home with Growing Older strives to educate, inspire, and connect people across generations and disciplines to re-envision and improve the experiences of later life. Don't forget to subscribe and tune in for the next episode.